Recently, I had the absolute privilege of sitting down with Financial Times journalist and prize-winning author Jimmy Burns to talk to him about his new book, A Faithful Spy. Here is that interview. So Jimmy, please could you start by introducing yourself, telling me a bit about kind of what you do?
Well, I'm Jimmy Burns. I'm a journalist and author. I've been a journalist for more than 30 years, most of it with the Financial Times, including many years as a foreign correspondent and also covering security and intelligence and defense.
What is the book about? What's the title, and kind of could you summarize it as if like kind of what you would write on the blurb?
The title of the book is A Faithful Spy. The reason I chose to use that title, it's a rare story in terms of the kind of run of intelligence books that have been published in recent years about a spy that was actually loyal to his country as opposed to betraying it, and yet belonged to that same generation of the Cambridge spies. He was recruited by MI6 in the mid-1930s. It begins with Walter Bell's recruitment by MI6 at the age of 26. He'd just finished university, he'd been studying law, he'd been campaigning actually for the Labour Party, so he was sort of left-leaning in his views. He was put in touch with someone in MI6, and he went along to this job really having no idea what it was going to mean to his life, but having a sense that this was the adventure that he'd been seeking since his early days at school, and that this was going to involve travel, and it was going to involve challenges totally beyond his imagination. And he was recruited and told he was going to New York, so he was actually sent to what was then called the Passport Office, which was a cover post for MI6, and he became the deputy for MI6 in New York during the late 1930s right through into World War II, and then became the main liaison with the nascent British, American intelligence service, the OSS, precursor of the CIA, and also the liaison with FBI at a critical juncture in the development of the so-called special relationship between the UK and the United States, which obviously flows into the Cold War, at which point he then moves into MI5, and there he experiences what I call the twilight of the British Empire, which was in key colonies like Kenya, India and the West Indies, where actually MI5, British security, British intelligence played a critical role in the transition to independence and also supporting the independent governments. A story which really remains not very told publicly until this moment.
How would you describe Walter Bell as a person? What was he like?
Well, the first time I met Walter Bell, I got a message actually through my father, because he was a friend of my father. I had just come back from Argentina, having covered the Falklands War and been a foreign correspondent there. And I got a message that there was this person called Walter Bell who wanted to invite me to lunch to his club, and so I turned up and found this sort of not supremely elderly, but obviously retired, kind of I think government official. I mean, he struck me as a sort of government official, but sort of drinking already a sort of dry martini, which is the drink of choice. You know, there in the sense that Ian Fleming got it right. You know, a lot of spies like their dry martinis, and I think he'd already had about 2 or 3 by the time I got there. And we sat down to lunch, and we knocked back a claret and a half. You know, but by which time you know, we'd both opened up to each other quite a lot, and from that moment onwards, we established a quite good relationship. He was in a way sort of a very complex character. He had moods. He was very moody. He went from sort of being incredibly humorous and funny and joie de vivre, enjoying life, to going into these black dog moods, and you had to ride them. But he had an incredible understanding, particularly of the British-American relationship. He had a particularly good understanding of the United States, and he had a very good understanding of our colonial history, the mistakes we made, and the solutions we went for. And then when he died, his widow rang me up and said, I've got all his personal papers. I can think of no one better to write about his life and find his true place in history than yourself, because you've obviously covered this area of intelligence. You knew him personally, he trusted you, and these papers are ones that which otherwise be forgotten.
A lot of history, but it also contains a lot relevant to today.
Yes, I think there are lots of sort of analogies about, you know, how does the kind of information that's collected by intelligence, how does that feed into policy, the tensions within intelligence of individual intelligence officers who don't particularly agree even with their bosses because they've got a greater sense of morality or ethics than their bosses. That comes across quite strongly. And also the kind of the decisions they have to take in very challenging situations. I mean, to give you an example, Walter Bell was posted by MI5 as the head of the sort of MI5 station in Nairobi in the build-up to probably the most bloody rebellion that the British Empire had faced till that moment, which was Mau Mau, which led to, you know, thousands of Kenyans being killed, you know, arrested, put in detention camps and all that. And Walter Bell comes through the narrative of this story as someone who really felt that the British government and the colonial service had got it wrong, that they didn't really understand African nationalism, they didn't really understand that these people had a just cause, and that we should have engaged them in a different way than simply stamping on their heads, you know. So, you know, that has analogies for today when we have areas of Africa as areas of conflict or potential conflict. We also have, you know, obviously the situation in Ukraine, which is the sort of first war on European soil since World War II, requiring all sorts of delicate balances between intelligence received, how that feeds into policy, and how do people within the machinery of government react to that kind of information.
When does the book come out, and when it does, where can people watching find it?
Well, it is published this autumn in October, and it will be published worldwide. It will be available immediately on Amazon, in all good bookshops, and very accessible from people in New York right through to London. And then people, I'm hoping and almost certain it will be of great interest to people, for instance, in Africa, for instance, because it's all to do with how we dealt with the decolonization of a key colony, which was Kenya. And then in India, of course, the period of Nehru's first government plays a strong role in this. And then the sort of the kind of special relationship and how that developed between the UK and the US is so relevant to today, you know, when we have the two countries are having to agree on policies which require a lot of sharing of intelligence, but also up against the prospect of a future president being re-elected in Donald Trump, who believes in America first and doesn't really believe in that special relationship. And that was a challenge that my man Walter Bell and the British faced in the late 1930s in the build-up to World War II, when the Americans were still maintaining that they didn't want to intervene in World War II, which of course, if they'd maintained that position, we probably found it very, very difficult to defeat Nazi Germany.
If you do want to pre-order the book, you can via the link in the description. Elliot Hartley, A Faithful Spy, 2023.